Welcome to the podcast. We do recover with Jared Miller, your host.
And I'm Dr. Terry Sellers, your co-host.
This is a podcast about recovery from addiction.
We want to talk about what successful recovery can look like.
Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn.
Ladies, lads, listeners from everywhere, welcome to episode 108. Today we have a special guest coming all the way from Reno, Nevada. Scott Henderson is joining us. Scott, everything going through on your end?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right, welcome to the podcast, buddy. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing really well today. Thank you.
Good, good. Well, it's episode 108 is brought to us by Rise Up Supplements. Rise Up Supplements is a nootropic line aimed at optimizing brain function and supporting mental health. We have two blends. There's Mindful Mood, which is going to decrease anxiety and going to enhance mood. And then there's Mind Shift, which is going to increase focus and optimize brain function. If you're unfamiliar with nootropics, Google it, check it out. These are supplements that are going to affect the mind. So for a little episode or a little podcast special, we're doing a promo. It's podcast 20. It saves you 20% off your entire purchase at checkout. Check it out, everybody. If you support the podcast through supporting our sponsors, you make it possible for us to bring these messages of hope out to the masses. So we really appreciate our sponsorships. Please go sponsor our sponsors. Go to riseupsups.com. That's RISEUPS.com. Podcast 20 saves you 20%. All right, Scott, here we go. You ready? So we usually start off with like some positive psychology. We call it new and goods. What's new and good in your world?
Well, my wife and I have currently started the guardianship process to basically have guardianship over our granddaughter. So
that's beautiful, man. That is new and good.
Yeah. She just turned 2 years old on December 27th, and we were just pleased as punch to be able to have her. And my wife actually looked at me today and said, "Who would have thought, Scott, that out of all of the relatives, you would be considered the stable one?" Yeah, right?
Yes, and we're going to get to that story. That sounds like there's a whole lot to that, buddy. I'm excited to get to it. Let's check in with Sean. Sean Denman, I need you to start off by just taking a deep breath, man. You're going 90 miles an hour.
Well, you're like podcast 7 today for me.
Yeah, I get it.
And so I had to cut the other person off to have you come in, and then they're coming back for more after we're done here.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I had like a big phone call and blah blah. You know, it's a day.
Yeah, man.
This is how I make things happen. Did you see the new box outside?
Yeah, you thrive off this stuff.
Yeah,
you wouldn't know what to do if you didn't have 20.
I'm gonna move the camera. I want to show everybody this. Let's see. Hold on a second. Which one is it? The wide camera? Yeah, here we go. You can't see.
Gonna blind you.
Yeah, that's a totally horrible picture. What you see there is my new sound booth. It's a 4x4x7 complete isolation, quiet sound booth for voiceover recording and stuff.
For like people that want to do books or things like that?
Yeah.
That's rad.
Less broadcast, more book and dry audio stuff. So if people want to come do that, come see me. We'll talk.
I know I've said this on previous podcasts, but one thing that I really admire about you, Mr. Donovan, is you're always looking to improve. You're always looking to change things up. You're like the optimizing guy. It's all that mind shift that you're taking.
If I could just do that with my body at the gym, that'd be great. But I could do it with everything else in my life.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. All right, let's get rocking and rolling. So, Scott, something tells me that you're a person in long-term recovery. Is that true?
September last year, I celebrated 8 years clean and sober.
8 years in recovery. 8 years in recovery.
Sir.
Fantastic. Well, guess what, Scott? You're on the right podcast then, buddy, because this is a podcast about recovery from addiction. So let's start. Where does that start for you? Like, everybody's journeys are a little bit different. If Dr. Sellers was on, a little passive-aggressive jab at Dr. Sellers, he'd ask you about your childhood and want to know what you got when you were 4 years old for Christmas and stuff. What I want to know is what was going on before, what happened, how are things now, right? So go ahead. Where does that start for you? Where does the substance abuse come in your life?
Well, it started at a young age. I was a military brat, father Army. And, I had a great life growing up. And I remember being really young, and my dad would always say, "Hey, Scotty, go get me a beer out of the fridge." I'd go run and I'd grab the beer and I'd pop the top and sip the foam off of it. and hand it to him, you know?
At what age is this? At what age are you sipping foam, Scott?
4, 5,
Wow.
somewhere in that area, you know? And I mean, and everybody thought it was the cutest thing ever, right? Because this was the 70s, you know, early 70s, and nobody cared, you know? I mean, they were still smoking on airplanes and everything else, you know? It was a normal thing. And then 1976, I believe my dad said, he asked me during the Super Bowl to go get him a beer. So I went over there and I grabbed 2 and I threw him one and cracked one and sat there next to him on the couch and proceeded to drink my beer. And he was like, okay.
Wow. And what age are you in this year?
6.
6 years old. Wow.
Yep. So
you started pretty young, Scott.
Yeah, you know, well, I mean, from what I've also heard is that they would put booze in my bottle when I was colic.
Oh, okay.
As an infant, you know, 2 years old or whatever, and everything. I guess flying when I was colic on the airplane, and my little sister was born in Germany, and I, at 2 years old, or a little over a year, took a flight to Germany with my mom, and was colic at this whole time on the plane. So, from what I heard, there was, you know, little shot of Jack Daniels in the bottle, calm you right down, you know?
I was just going to ask, was it whiskey? Because I've heard that too. I've also heard that people, so I got Mandy, my wife, across from me, and we're getting ready to have a baby girl here. And we will not be putting whiskey on the child's gums or in the bottle, regardless of colic or not, right? Like okay. Let's learn from Scott's story here. I love it. Okay. Keep rolling, Scott. Sorry, man.
And, you know, that's where it all started. So I guess when I was still in diapers was my first taste of alcohol. But I had my first beer at 6, and then throughout my life, you know, whenever my dad wanted a beer, I would go and I would suck the foam off of it. Or then, you know, I would take a drink, you know, and so on and so forth. And, you know, everybody thought it was cute when little Scotty would go and grab their eggnog at the, you know, Christmases or whatever. And, you know, of course they had rum in them and all that. And, you know, so it was normal.
And 6-year-old Scotty doesn't know, right? Like you're just like getting some attention, right? Trying to be like your dad. I can kind of think of like, I used to, when my dad would shave, I would just get a razor that didn't have a blade in it, and I would like pretend shave too. So yeah, I got you. So that's kind of
put the shaving cream on your face and pretend shaving. Like,
man. Okay, so you're just at that phase.
I just electric razored my granddaughter when I was shaving this morning, just, you know, because it's that sort of thing. So it's that exact same thing.
Okay.
And
so it was normal. Super
it was normal. Yeah, exactly. What wasn't normal is later on going into middle school and stuff, and I'm, you know, pouring a little bit of Cointreau or whatever it may be, little booze into little mini bottles or whatever, and bringing them with me to school.
In middle school.
You know, middle school. Yep. And then it just progressed from there. You know, as they say, this is a progressive disease. So we start out small, and in order to try to get that same feeling, we have to increase what we're doing. So, you know, high school comes around and I'm not going to classes. I'm skipping school. I'm doing all the things that really were detrimental to me.
Yeah.
But
the unmanageability that comes along with the substance use.
Absolutely. But to me, it was just, I didn't see it. I was too close to the trees to see the forest.
Right.
So it was just normal progression for me. It got to the point where I'd started to run away from school, from house, you know, from home, and living out on the streets for, you know, a couple of weeks, and then come home and, you know, steal my dad's car or stepdad's car. And, you know, my mom and dad got divorced, which, you know, take that role model away and then put in somebody new, and it's, oh yeah, well, I'll show you, you know, you're not my dad, and, you know, et cetera, and it just kind of rolled from there.
Yeah,
And
the rebellion kicked in. Something tells me, Scott, I don't know what year you went to high school, but something tells me back then they didn't really have a lot of education around substances. Like, do you remember
I
sitting in health
graduated
class
I graduated in 1988. So yeah, no, they didn't.
they didn't sit you around and say, listen, Scotty's 6 years old sipping foam off of a beer, having a beer with his dad around Super Bowl is probably not the best idea.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no.
it got to the point where when I was a senior in high school, I ended up my mom put me into rehab
Oh, wow.
in Marin County. Actually, my sister had gone before me, and then I was in a private boarding school. I was given a choice: would you like to go to military school, or do you want to go to a private boarding school in Lake Tahoe?
Was this because your mom knew of the substance abuse, or was it the
Is that really
behaviors?
Yeah, it was behaviors. It was behavior in school.
But
We were
did she
living
know
off
that
of
you were
school.
drinking, like, or was it just like, oh, we got to get these behaviors under control?
Oh no, she knew.
Okay.
She knew I was drinking. She knew I was doing drugs. She knew I was doing all of that.
Scott,
My
you just
recovery,
crossed over from alcohol, which I know it's still a drug, but you said doing drugs. It sounds like in high school became more than just liquid.
absolutely. Again, the progression of my illness took me there. That's not everybody's story. It happens to be part of mine. I'm both, I am an addict, full bore. It doesn't matter what it is, adrenaline, etc. Drugs, alcohol. I was into all of it. And again, it started progressively as well. Just smoking a joint, and then it was more and more and more, and then it went on to, mushrooms and cocaine and methamphetamines, and I mean,
Just
you
grew.
name it.
Just grew.
I was doing everything I'd get my hands on. I used to tell people I was a professional guinea pig. If you want somebody to test it for you, I'm your guy.
Talk to me about boarding school and rehab. You said that was at 16?
No, I graduated when I was 17 years old. Okay. So it was at 17. I went up to boarding school in Tahoe. Like I said, I had a choice of Lake Tahoe or military school. That's not really much of a choice. I was like, let's see, skiing for PE. Sure, I'll go there.
Right.
Right. But try to, at that time, all my mom knew was, let's get him out of that environment, and that will help him. Well, what she didn't realize is, skiing up there, I was filling my Boda bag, which is, a little leather bag with Everclear and Kool-Aid from the school's cafeteria, had the Kool-Aid. We would get somebody to buy a bottle, save it, and we would fill it up half and half, and we would be drinking that and doing bong hits and smoking pot on the lifts,
right.
for skiing.
So she took you out of the environment, but you still were very much in your active addiction. Still very much in your disease. It followed you. Your disease went with you.
That's the things with addicts is it's not about the place you're at. It's about the place you're at in here, not physically. Because it doesn't matter where you put me in the world, I will find what I'm looking for quickly. I know what to look for. I know how to find it. I know who to talk to. As addicts, at least for myself, I was really in tune with that. So I knew immediately what to look for, who to look for, and how to talk to people.
It's funny how we can get super resourceful when we have this drive that just will not stop, right? Like, it's funny because then a lot of times when we get in treatment or we get into early recovery, like, forget getting a job and forget, like, I'm just speaking from experience. People go from being very resourceful, like you're talking about, Scott, being able to find it, sniff it out, locate it, to, anyways, that's probably a tangent.
I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Yeah, but people have told me, what is being an addict's like having a full-time job, and I'm like, no, it's a lifestyle. Every thinking moment, every breathing moment, and every wake moment revolves around it. If it's not doing it, it's where do I get it? What do I have to do to get it? Who do I get it from? It's the whole thing. There's no setting it off to the side. Everything revolved around it. Yeah, so for me, putting me in another location, all that's doing is changing the people, places, and things that I had to do to get it, or the people that I got it from.
Mm-hmm.
And while it was less as far as hard drugs went, it was more for alcohol. Nevada, because I was in South Lake Tahoe, so it was Nevada. So at that time, Nevada was really easy with their alcohol laws, but very, very stringent with their drug laws.
Hmm.
So it really transferred from my last year of high school to being really back to the bottle. And I went down to visit my parents in on Presidio, San Francisco at the time, and they had me admitted into Marin General Hospital for the Adolescent Recovery Center for the let's see, it was the spring, early summer of 1988.
So they started realizing that even though you went to military school, right, which was meant to address the behaviors, it was more than
Well,
that.
it wasn't a military school. That was my choice.
Oh, that's right. It was military school or Lake Tahoe. Okay.
So I chose Lake Tahoe, and they thought that just, the change of venue would change who I am.
How was that experience going to the state hospital for adolescent substance abuse?
Well, it really threw up big wall. I grew a big wall of resentment from that, just because I was student body president at the time. I was getting excellent grades, better grades than I'd ever gotten before. I mean, yeah, I was doing what I was doing, but I was doing well.
Mm.
And it just seemed like, oh, okay, since I'm doing well and you don't really see me in my day to day, how do you know what's going on? And then to throw me in there, it just immediate resentment. Right then, brick wall just shot up, and I closed myself off to everything. And I said, oh, okay, if you're going to treat me like this, then I'm going to be like this. If that's what you're looking for, that's what you're going to get. And I'm going to give it to you in spades.
So instead of seeking the answer, you just dug in deeper.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, exactly right. It's like, oh, you want a hole? Let me show you. I'll dig you a hole.
Here. Yeah. Watch. Yeah. Let me hurt you by hurting me. Right.
You're going to treat me like a criminal. I'm going to become the best criminal you've ever seen. You know what I mean? I didn't, unfortunately, at the time, have the mental capacity to understand that they were trying to help.
Right.
I took it as, you're punishing me for doing well.
Okay.
And unfortunately, that's just how it was. And while I was in there, they ended up moving to Monterey. And when I got out of the treatment center, I came to live with them in Fort Ord and Monterey, California.
Still with all these resentments, still with all this hard feelings, or had you kind of worked it out?
Oh no, I still had them.
Okay.
But I am really good at giving you what you want to hear.
Manipulation. Yeah.
I did the exact things that they wanted me to do in that rehab. And boy, was I a model student.
Sure. Yeah.
And they were so impressed with how I turned everything around and how much I opened up, and because I realized fighting it was not going to help me. That was going to make it worse. So I played their game. I played it well. And when I turned 18, I voluntarily checked myself out in September. And
this is probably a really weird question, Scott, but it's very interesting for me, so I'm going to ask it. How many of those people were people in recovery that were working at the hospital, or were they just people that kind of read it in a book?
At that time in 1988, I'd say most of them, if not all of them, came from a book.
Yeah, because we get the song and dance all the time, right? We get they learn the language, and they present very well, one hand in front, the other hand behind the back type stuff. It sounds like that's what you had going on. And when you've been through it yourself, and real recognizes real, right? And
absolutely.
As much as people have this I don't know. I hear some people have like some controversy around people in recovery helping other people. We get it. We know to look for those behaviors. We know to look for we call it the golden child syndrome, right? When they're presenting very well, but they've got a whole lot. It's like a duck on a pond. You know, it looks like they're just gliding smoothly, but they're kicking like heck underneath the water. Yeah, man. So thank you for letting me ask that. It was just interesting.
So that was just that little rehab was there as a short term, and then they sent me to another rehab in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that was their first year as drug and alcohol rehab for juveniles. It was originally a full lockdown facility for severely mentally impaired and aggressive teenagers. So, you know, we being addicts, if we got out of hand, they would force you to the ground and shoot you with Haldol.
Oh, wow.
To calm you down and knock you out. That was their standard operating procedure. They didn't understand addiction. They understood, these kids that we normally get are violent criminal offenders that can't be housed in a regular jail, so they go there.
So they would restrain you. They'd use physical force. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Physical force and chemical restraint.
Wow.
As well. So, like I said, they didn't understand the concept of addiction. So we had a bunch of kids that were like, "Oh, time for me to be bad. Time to get my fix." Lucky I wasn't one of them, although I did see it. I saw it happen, and I got out, and that really started when I got out of there and came home to Monterey. I ran away from home within a couple of months, and I've been on the streets. I've pretty much stayed on the streets since 18 till I was about 44 years old, and when I got sober.
18 to 44 years old.
I lived more of my life on the streets than I did not on the streets. And by on the streets, I do mean literal on the street. In Monterey, I used to live in one of the abandoned sardine oil tanks on Cannery Row. I was known as a row rat. So I lived, in the rocks and stuff down underneath all the buildings, and that's where I went. And I mean, I made friends with bartenders and waiters and stuff, and I would go and I would bust tables for a couple of free drinks and some food and maybe a couple of bucks to buy a pack of smokes, but while
it's
I was
funny because I get that. So my story has some homelessness in it. And a lot of times when I share it, people will ask me, like, how did you come up with the money when you were homeless? Which for legal reasons, I don't go into all of that, right? Because I don't know how long the statute's been. but just kidding, everybody. I'm just trying to be funny. But you get a hustle, right? You develop kind of a hustle, and it sounds like your hustle is doing a little bit of bartending, and you made some friends, and yeah, it's survival, man. It's not like, it's funny when they ask that question, I'm like, dude, it's survival. You do what you have to do, right? Like, you don't want to know a lot of those stories.
It's really funny because I was also really good at breaking into cars. So what I would do is when drunk people would lock their keys in their car, I would charge them to break into the car to get their keys out.
Okay.
Use your skills the way you got them, right?
Right.
One of the things that I'm proud of is I was on the streets there for probably 20 years, and I kept 27 kids off the streets.
Wow.
These kids would come down and they would think that they want to get away from their parents, and they run away and all this. And I would forgo my hustles. I would forgo my spot that I had that was, dry and somewhat warm and out of the elements. And I would take them and show them what life on the street really was like. We would eat out of the McDonald's dumpster. We would climb in there and we would take the pieces that were bitten off and we would eat the rest. And I showed them what real living on the streets was like. It's not just away from mommy and daddy. Mm-hmm. This is tough. And I actually had parents come down and try to give me money, and I refused to take that money. And I said, I didn't do that for you. I did that for them to have a better life so they didn't have to go through what I'm going through now. Yeah. Even in the midst of my addiction, I understood that I could use that to help others. And that has always been a driving force in my life.
I wonder if that was almost like the seed, right? Like the seed of, I can be an influence to other people. We're coming up on time here. We got about 20 seconds left, but man, I'm excited to get back to that. And I want to hear the comeback story from 18 to 44 being homeless. Was that right?
Yep.
Man, can't wait to hear your comeback story, Scott. So stay with us here. We got a little 30-second sponsorship mention, and then we'll be right back to Scott Henderson. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
You are listening to We Do Recover with Jared Miller and co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. We'll be right back after this short break with more of We Do Recover with Jared Miller, sponsored by Steps Recovery Center and the Hilton Garden Inn.
I'm Desmond Lomax, one of the clinical executives here at Steps Recovery, and once you become the Steps family, you're just a part of the Steps family. A lot of us have overcome substances, overcome addiction, and now we're able to help other people. Second of all, we're also going to help you in a way where you can afford to be helped. Third of all, we're going to give you the same quality that many organizations are charging 2 to 3 times, and it's more about you than it is about our organization.
We welcome you back to We Do Recover with Jared Miller, co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn. And now with part 2 of our podcast, Jared Miller and Dr. Terry Sellers.
And we are back to episode 108. We got Scott Henderson, and he just got done sharing about his childhood. He started sipping beers at age 6, had his first beer actually with his dad watching the Super Bowl at age 6. Spent from 18 to 44 homeless, and that's where he's at in this story. We're going to get back to it. I'm excited to.
Well, he was talking about the not so happy meals.
Yeah,
I just had that in mind. Not so happy meals.
They were not happy.
Yes, yes, yeah. Sadly, I've been there. I know what Scott's talking about. So we're going to get back to Scott's story. Episode 108, part 2 is brought to us by the Hilton Garden Inn. It's always sunny and bright at the Hilton Garden Inn in St. George, Utah. If you're looking to get away, come check out Zion National Park. Check out the Hilton Garden Inn in St. George, Utah. They have amazing amenities. It's always very clean, friendly staff. We love them. We appreciate them sponsoring this podcast. Also, our sponsorship mentioned during that 30-second break, Steps Recovery Centers is no longer our sponsor, but we're showing them some love, right? I mean, they were a sponsor for 2 years. I just want to throw a little out there. If you have an organization that would like to sponsor, reach out to us. You can send me an email at the full name of the podcast, We Do Recover with Jared Miller @gmail.com, or you can send us a direct message on Facebook, Instagram, all the social media, all the stuff, Sean, all the stuff. So we would love to hear from you. We have a main sponsorship opportunity available. Okay, Scott. You're kind of like taking these young men under their wing and being like, look, dude, this isn't the life you want, right? Like there's nothing glorious about like this whole hipster thing's like may sound cool, but it's not cool when you're down and out and homeless and having not so happy meals out of the McDonald's trash cans. Where does your journey go from there?
I didn't tell them that at all. I told them it was fantastic. Come join me. And I just showed them what it was like and let them make their own decision because they were like me. They were rebellious. If I told them, oh, this isn't for you, it's like, oh, yeah, I'll show you. I'll get through this anyway.
Smart man.
I knew I couldn't tell them that. If I told them that, it would just set it up for them to want to do that. So I had to say, yeah, come on. I'll show you the ropes, and that's just what I did. And I mean, I bounced around while I was there on the streets, Moscow, Idaho and back. And I mean, just all over the place. And my drug use got so much worse.
Did you
when
ever,
you're on the street,
real quick, did you ever, just another one of my curious random questions, I'm trying to be there with you right now, right? Like in my mind. And one of the stories that I kind of told myself in this period was like, I'm a rebel, like I'm a vagabond. Like I came up with this like narrative to try to improve my situation or make me feel better about the depths that my addiction had taken me. Was there any type of narration going on in your head? Was there any type of like, does that make sense to you at all?
It does. And the only real narration for me was I hung around people worse than me.
I had justification.
This crazy dude that I let stay in that spot that I had that was that abandoned soil water tank. I mean, this guy used to pee in jars and store it. And I mean, Yeah, he was really bad off. So if I kept people around me worse off than me, I'm not that bad.
Yeah.
That was my justification.
And for me, it was like
So-
I hated society. Like I can remember standing on street corners and yelling at cars, "The things you own you," right? Like I had this really like deep psychological, like I just was an anti-social as far as like I felt the narration I was telling myself was like, I don't want to fit into society because society's so sick. I had this judgmental, like you've rejected me, but I'm rejecting you type thing. Was any of that true for you, Scott?
No, mine was opposite. The vast majority of the time I was homeless, you wouldn't know.
Mm. So you're kind of bougie homeless.
The way I talk, I have a very good vocabulary and everything else. Yeah, I was bougie homeless, but that was my fun.
I was like mental health broken down homeless.
You let me into this I'm in this nice dinner and you have no idea who I am.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And that was my get back at them is, you don't know who you're dealing with.
Right. Like you were pulling one over on them. You were slick. You were sneaky.
Yep. I was pulling one over on them and without them knowing it. And that was my love right there.
Yeah. What do you think that you really needed in that moment though? Like for me, I can look back and think like, I was mental health crisis homeless where I had a lot of mental health stuff going on. Ultimately though, I just wanted to be seen. I just wanted love. I just wanted acceptance. I wanted to know that somehow, some way it was possible to repiece my life back together.
For me, I was selfish.
Okay.
Even the whole time I was on the streets, I never got state help. I never asked for help. I never flew a sign on the corner. I never asked for money. I never begged for money because I knew that I had done this to myself and I couldn't fit into society because I enjoyed doing what I was doing and didn't have to answer to anyone for it.
So you genuinely, that's very interesting for me, Scott. You genuinely thought like you had the reflection or the mental clarity to realize that you had done this to you?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I knew the reason I was there is because I wanted to be there.
So you had no victim mentality stuff going on?
No, there was no victim mentality.
Okay.
It was you guys were the victims. I was playing you because I was so much smarter and knew so much better.
I hope this is interesting to people, bro. This is super interesting to me. Like I love when I can geek out about this type of stuff with somebody that like gets it and has a different perspective. So just thank you.
Yeah. And that was my get back at society was I don't have to pay your bills. I don't have to pay rent. I was living on the ocean in Monterey, California, where people pay through the nose to live. I was living closer than them for free. And that was my get back at them. I didn't have to pay taxes. I didn't have to pay rent. I didn't have any bills. I had no responsibilities. There was nothing holding me back. If I wanted to up and leave, I could right then and there.
Isn't it so interesting how like our substance abuse? Sorry. Go ahead. We have a little bit of a delay. So for those that are listening, I may cut Scott off. It's just a tiny bit of a delay. Go ahead. What were you saying?
And that to me was, I fully realized that. And I had that full realization. I did the alcohol and the drugs to overcome those feelings of sadness and loneliness and the fact that I wasn't a part of. I thought I was getting one over and I thought I was being a part of society on the fringe, but I knew I wasn't, and it hurt. Yeah. So a lot of that alcohol and drug use was to mask that feeling of inadequacy. Even though I felt I was superior, I knew I was inferior because I would watch these people drive by in their nice cars and go, well, I don't have that, or shop, or be able to buy a pack of smokes, or be able to sleep on a bed, or, be able to go to the fridge. I didn't have any of that. So I mean, I'm eating people's leftovers,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I am. So I am therefore a part of society's leftovers, and how do I justify that? It's by getting as messed up as I possibly could.
Well, I was going to say the one plays off the other too, right? Because I know for me, there came a point in time where like I had a suicide attempt, and it was 100% because I did not believe, I thought I was mentally like just done, right? Like, but it's amazing when you take away the substance, how the brain gets healthier, right? So they definitely play off of each other. Like whether the one causes the other or the other one starts the one, they're definitely like a 1-2 combo. It's like a, you know what I mean? It's like a jab punch, right? Like, yeah. So I get what you're saying. At what point were you, I mean, how do you become not homeless when you've been homeless since 18 to 44? Like, let's get into the solution, man. We got 15 minutes left.
In 2014, while I was starting, while I was doing all this, then the criminal things started happening.
Mm-hmm.
Started, getting in trouble with the law for more and more and worse and worse. And in 2014, I was done. I was living here in Reno, and I was absolutely done. And on my birthday, I wanted to kill myself. So I had a rope, everything set up on a tree by the river. And then I fell out because I was coming off the drugs. And
we can laugh about it now, right? Is it okay that I kind of laugh? Because it's kind of funny, right? Like the drugs saved you, but they were what was killing you, right?
And I couldn't find any more.
Yeah.
So 4 days later, on September 22nd, I got a hold of some and got arrested with it. And it was a pretty substantial charge. And I ended up looking at, am I going to prison or not? And sitting in jail, I came to the conclusion that I'd already had grandkids and stuff back by now. And I was like, well, do I really want them to visit me through glass? And while I was in jail, awaiting trial and all this, my dad came to visit me. And this is what really did it. He came to visit me, and he'd always been there by my side through everything. And he came up to me, and it was a visit out of the blue, and I got called for visiting. I was like, oh, okay. So I got on the phone, and he said, hey, I put $20 on your books. I said, thanks. You didn't have to do that. He said, no problem. And by the way, you're no longer my son. You're dead to me. Never call me again. Never talk to me again. You are no longer my son. Stay out of my life. To me, you're dead. Got up and walked away. My jaw hit the floor. And I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
Honestly.
That's heavy.
And
man.
I remember I had a good friend of mine I had a friend that I'd made, and I'm still friends with him now, that I'd made in jail. And he was in the same pod as me. And he and I would go sit out on the yard and talk. And I went out there and I cried on his shoulder in jail, which is a huge no-no.
Yeah, no,
you don't do that in jail.
You don't show
But
vulnerability.
at this point, I was broken. My rock had absolutely sank out from under me. And I realized then what I was doing to others by, it's not just me. My actions are affecting others. And I remember that night very clearly. It was a clear night, and I looked through the chain link that was above us. And instead of those foxhole prayers of God, Lord, get me out of this, and I promise I'll never do it again, I said, Lord, no matter what, I'm not doing this again. I don't care if I go to prison. I don't care if I get drug court. I don't care if I get probation. I don't care if they let me out tomorrow. It doesn't matter what happens to me. I am done.
Sounds like surrender to me, man.
That was an absolute breaking point.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely surrendered at that point. And I haven't done anything since then. I ended up with drug court out of that charge, and I ended up getting out of jail on probation. And they let me get out of jail on probation to the homeless shelter. which I didn't go to because that was gross. So my first year of drug court and sobriety was still on the streets.
Really?
I would wake up with drunks pouring beers on my head, wake up to being kicked. All I would do is I got a temporary job from a temp agency, and I would make enough day labor, and I would make enough money for a pack of cigarettes, something to eat, and bus fare for the next day I worked. And no matter what, I would not spend that $2 for bus fare to get to work on Monday because it was a Monday through Friday. So through the weekend, I didn't work, so I didn't have any money. But I still kept that $2 no matter what. I would go run through casinos and pick butts out of ashtrays if I wanted to smoke cigarettes. That's what I did. But I stayed sober no matter what. I stayed sober. And as I laid right there on the Riverwalk, which was on it's like a granite steps, these big granite steps. And I would pull a cardboard box down there and I would lay on that. And I had my backpack as a pillow. And I would look up at these expensive high-rise apartments. And I would say, maybe one day I could be in there. But for now, every day I laid down, I said, thank you, Lord, for the obstacles you've put in my way, because it's shown me that I'm able to overcome those. No matter what, I am staying sober.
Bro, you found gratitude laying on some marble stairs on a cardboard box with a backpack as a pillow. If people can't find gratitude in better situations than that, I don't know what to tell them, man. That's amazing.
Every hardship after that was a thank you for showing me that I'm able to overcome that without drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
I am able to do that through the program, with a sponsor, working the steps, and understanding myself and just relying on myself at this point. And this is the first time that in my life that I hadn't blamed others for what's going on in my life. I took responsibility. I owned it. I said, you wouldn't be in this spot, Scott, if you hadn't done this, and this.
Yeah, it's huge, man. I love the book Extreme Ownership by Jacko Willings and Leif Babin. I always tell people, anybody that'll listen to me for 2 seconds, I tell them that book changed my life. So Scott, though, you touched on something, you just kind of breezed past it, which it might be a big staple in your recovery. I'm assuming. You said you were hitting meetings and you got a sponsor. It sounds like you were doing some 12-step program stuff.
Well, see, while I was on the streets being sober, I was in drug court. So that meant every 2 days, I would randomly have to go drug test. I would have to go to court once a week in front of the judge. I went to counseling sessions at a recovery place. It was at, external. So I would go there and I would talk to a counselor once a week.
Outpatient setting. Yep.
I also went to the parole and probation to have my probation officer to talk to them as well. So all of this was going on as I was still on the streets.
So you had some structure, just not a roof over your head and transportation.
I was the most structured, unstructured person you've ever met.
I love that, man. That might be the golden nugget I pull out of this.
That's like kind of having a weight on a pendulum and having it fly around and consider the string, the structure. That was my life at that time. But that, to me, gave me a better foundation of recovery, because if I can do that, I can do anything. This isn't, there's nothing that's going to stop me. If that's how it started, then continuing it can only be easier.
Yeah. That reminds me of, I am not a big platitude fan, right? But it reminds me that recovery platitude, addiction is giving up everything for one thing. Recovery is giving up one thing for everything. Like, that's what I heard in your message, Scott. Yeah. So did you ever get up off the streets? Like, you look like you're living in a home now. We got about 7 minutes left here, buddy. Yeah. How did you rise from marble
while I was
stairs?
On the streets and everything, my dad, when I was in Monterey, said, hey, you need to get out of here. Come live with me. I went to Louisiana. He put me through culinary school. So, everywhere you go, always needs cooks.
Well, and your dad
having a
saw the
car-
growth, it sounds like, because right, how does he go from saying, "Hey, you're no longer in my life, you're dead to me," to like,
No. That was before all that happened. That was while I was still between the 18 and 44.
okay,
Through that time, I had actually gotten a associate's degree and done all that. And that's part of how I moved from town to town, is I always had a cook's job. Because everywhere you go, there's restaurants. They always need cooks. So by doing that, that was kind of my hustle. But there was a lot of drugs with cooking and everything else. So, coming back to it, there were times that I was lucid, and then I would shoot myself in the foot, and off I'd go on a runner, and that was it. And I would, throw that away and start all over again.
So after the drug court, okay, yeah.
Now I'm on the streets in drug court. My cousin happens to be the Reno Police Department, works for the police department as a police officer. Unbeknownst to me, my father was talking to him, and he was checking up on me through my courts. So he could see that all my drug tests were clean. I was making my court dates. I was making my, I was doing the program correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And after about a year that I was sitting there on the streets, reading a book, minding my own business, and I hear, "Hey," and I look up, and my dad is standing in front of me. "Oh, hi." He said, "Hi, you want to get some lunch?" I said, "Sure, I would love to." And we went for lunch, and he said, "Look, I know you're doing well. I know you're doing what you need to do." I was a little hot-headed, might be where you get it, but hey, sorry,
That's
okay.
Okay.
My granddaughter, the one we're trying to get custody of. But she's, my dad said, "Look, you're doing the thing. Let's get you a place to live."
Yeah, man.
And he got me legally. And from then on, he was part of my life again. He recently passed away, but he passed away proud of me, because I do have sobriety and I am doing it. And the only reason that happened was because I didn't ask for it. I didn't expect it. I didn't even know it was going to happen.
Yeah.
All I was doing is I was doing the right thing for me, which again influenced those people around me to want to be a part of my life again. I never asked anyone to be a part of my life. In that time I was on the streets, I'd had a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I was not there for at all. So part of my story is my 2-year-old granddaughter right now, the one banging on the walls that I'm sure you guys.
Yeah, don't even worry about it. Yeah, super cute.
But she's in the other room with my wife. I now have a career. I now have strong sobriety. I am a sponsor for someone in recovery who has 5 years of sobriety themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I now have my mom back in my life, my sister back in my life. My daughter lives right up the street from me. We moved her up from Arizona with my granddaughter and got them into an apartment, and now they're doing well here. And that's all because I'm clean and sober and actively making my life better. And people want to be around that. Those same people that didn't want me around because I pushed them away and I was destroying my life, I was also destroying theirs. And as I became willing to make my life better, they became willing to want to be a part of that.
Yeah. In the basic text, there's a little part that I remember that I love. It's one of my favorite parts, and it says, oftentimes our loved one, basically I'm ad-libbing here, right? Like I can't quote it, but it says, oftentimes our loved ones doubt our clean time, but clean time speaks for itself. So eventually, right? Because we've told them, how many times we told them like, "Oh, I'm clean this time.
How many times have I lied to them? Oh, I'm all good. Yeah.
But consistent clean time speaks for itself. When you start to rebuild your life and you're putting one foot in front of the other, I mean, it's powerful. Like people can see it, and people need to see it, right? Because we've talked the talk for so long, they really need to see us walk the walk. And oftentimes, like in your story, they come out and they help.
Like you were saying before, when I was in rehab, you can't BS a BSer.
Right.
We know. When I was going through counseling, I asked my counselor, I said, "Are you in recovery?" My first counselor said, "No." And I said, "Awesome. I hope you do well in this. I'm going to need to talk to somebody that is." Nothing against you, but you won't understand it if you haven't lived it.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of my recovery. I don't trust anybody that's learned this from a book.
Yeah, and sometimes when you know somebody's struggling and they're coming in, they're giving you the parakeet talk and they're saying all this stuff, right? And they're masking what's really going on. I literally have looked across in the face of a client and said, "Are you sure that's the story you want to go with?" And they know that I know, right? Like they know that I know.
You're not going to call me on it if you can't identify it.
Right. Yeah.
And it takes me to know me.
Yeah. Listen, Scott, we got
Someone
about
that's can understand it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So congratulations on the 8 years, right? Since
Thank
2014. That's huge. Listen, I love the little babies in the other room kicking and hitting on the wall, right? Because that's proof, man. You're living in recovery. You got your family there. You're doing the deal. One of the biggest takeaways I got from your story, Scott, and I hope that our listeners got the same one, is if Scott can do this being homeless from age 18 to age 44, I can do it too. Thank you so much, buddy. I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And the one thing I want to make sure is, we are not a glum lot. Sobriety can be fun. Try to find fun in what you do. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Listen, on the 27th, we will have Kalichi.
Thank you for joining us today on We Do Recover with Jared Miller.
Help us spread our message of hope. Like, comment, and share.
If you have any topics or ideas for future shows, please share that on our Facebook page.
That Facebook page is We Do Recover with Jared Miller. If you or a loved one needs help, please reach out to us. Again, thank you for listening.
Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn. This has been a production from a podcast studio.